It's the Draft Fellows coming at you live. Kyle and Andrew breaking down the drive. Prospects to roster, we got the flow. First round picks to the ones you don't know. Talk about the combine, skills on display. Who's rising up and who's falling away. Roster building like a GM in the zone. Kyle Fellows, Andrew Mertig, they own the phone.
Hey, welcome back to the Draft Fellows podcast. I'm Andrew Mertig. That's Kyle Fellows. Together, we are the Draft Fellows. Make sure you're checking out our content on YouTube or the audio version on your favorite podcasting platform. Kyle, it has been a while.
It has.
Especially for the audio listeners who haven't heard our content because we've been doing all the audio versions on the Pack-A-Day podcast. So for them, it's probably back to like February. For YouTube viewers, we've been off for a few weeks post-draft. So like, how are you doing?
I'm doing really good. We needed a break, right? Like you don't go through like the craziness of the draft and all the hype build up to it. You get there and you love it. And then you just kind of like need that like almost content detox right after the draft where you just like take a step back and let things settle out. But I'm excited to talk about this with you because we haven't. Like we literally stepped back from the draft and we know a little bit about where we felt about a lot of these prospects going into the draft, but we haven't gotten to talk about landing spots almost at all. And so this is going to be a super fun conversation. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, literally 3 days after the draft ended, I was flying halfway across the world. And so I was just out for 2 weeks. And so we didn't get to break this down at the time. But I think this is actually a really interesting time. Some other things around the NFL, of course, have clarified. We got a chance to review some of the draft classes as a whole. And I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation. So the goal for tonight is to get through two divisions. And we're going to kick things off with the NFC East. And first up, at least alphabetically, is the Dallas Cowboys. So we won't read the entire class to you, but just going through rounds 1 through 3, Tyler Booker, the guard from Alabama, is picked 12. In the second round, the Cowboys get Donovan Ezraku, the edge out of Boston College. And in the third round, they get cornerback Siobhan Revel Jr. out of East Carolina. Overall, what are you thinking at the top of this draft?
So I actually love this class. Like, I don't know that I think it's been a while since I felt this good about a draft for the Cowboys. And so I don't know how they ended up here, but I like the picks that they made. Like, if you really think about it, like to get Booker, Ezraku, and Revel where they did, these are all guys that at one point in the process we thought were all first round values. And I think that, obviously they have to hit and Revel has to prove that he can stay healthy. But if all three of these guys hit and even become the B+ version of what, we think that they can be, this could be an absolutely huge class for Dallas.
Yeah, and I love the fit of Revel in a really, really aggressive secondary. And so you hope he can recover from that injury fully. And if he does, you're getting a top end of the first round type of talent. And we'll see. The medicals clearly were an issue for a lot of NFL teams. The fact that he slipped in the middle of the third round. But this is a guy with really elite talent. Ezraku, fun fit. I think opposite of Micah Parsons, this is going to be a really, really annoying player for the rest of the NFC East to have to go against. And then, of course, Booker, just like, I don't know. There's never a guarantee. Nobody's a guarantee, but Tyler Booker is about as close as they come. And I think he's going to be a really, really fun fit. So taking a look at the rest of this class, day 3, the Cowboys had 6 selections. So is there anybody that's really sticking out to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of cheating because it's the first one, but it's still a 5th round pick. But Jaden Blue is interesting because in my mind, he is a little bit more of a complimentary type of a player. But he steps into a situation in Dallas where he could be asked to do more because of the lack of talent there that's in front of him. So it'll just be fascinating to see how big of a role he can carve out in year 1 and, of course, beyond as he stays there like into the rest of his rookie contract. But Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders, good players, but a lot of questions about their durability and the long-term plan there. So I think Jaden Blue could be a sneaky player that they added here in the 5th round that will be kind of fun to watch his career unfold.
Yeah, there was sort of this there were the early declaring running backs that we knew were coming out, right? The players who basically were announcing they were draft eligible before the college football season was even over. And then there was sort of a wave of late early declarees, if that makes sense, like right before the deadline. I think about Jaden Blue, Damian Martinez, et cetera. The list goes on. And all of those players seemingly slipped because it was a really deep running back class. I think Jaden Blue has a chance to be very good. I think by the end of the year, he may be their go-to back. If I'm going to pick somebody else out, because Blue would have been my choice too, going into the 6th round, offensive tackle Johnny Cornelius from Oregon. I think there's a lot of upside to work with there. And that's somebody that you can sit for a year or two, could be a really nice depth piece, maybe a swing tackle, and then eventually develop into a starter. So love that. And overall, I think I agree with you. I really like what the Cowboys did in this class. And so then we're going to switch over to the New York Giants. And of course, at pick 3, they take Abdul Carter, the edge from Penn State. And then they trade back up into the 1st round at pick 25 and take quarterback Jackson Dart at Ole Miss. In the 3rd round, they did end up getting defensive lineman Darius Alexander out of Toledo. So what are we thinking of the Giants class?
I think the Giants played this really well. Like, the New York staff there is in a really tricky spot because unless things change really quickly, Brian Dable and Joe Shane are probably out of a job this time next year, if we're just being honest. But I like that they didn't press too much, right? Like Abdul Carter, a great pick at 3, best player available. They didn't force the quarterback there. They did their homework, and you can disagree with the results if you want. If you don't like Jackson Dart, then it's a little bit tougher. But they decided that they preferred Dart to Sanders and the other quarterbacks in this class, and they did what they wanted. And I think that that's an interesting process, and I like that they didn't. I think that things could have gotten really weird for the Giants really fast if they would have forced a lot of things. So I kind of like that they stuck to their process and they did what they felt good with. And we'll see what the results are. But I think you can like the process here for the Giants.
Yeah, and you're right. They could have done a lot of things with pick 3. Abdul Carter's probably the best player in this class. And so, just because you have Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau, doesn't mean you can't add a potential superstar to that mix. And so, we'll see how they utilize those 3 alongside of Dexter Lawrence. But I think for opposing offensive lines, that's going to be a nightmare to block up. And then Jackson Dart, and the one thing with Dart, and you and I did not see eye to eye on him. You were a bit higher on Jackson than I was. I think if he is going to turn into what the Giants hope he is, they're in a very precarious situation, because when you have a coach and a GM on the hot seat, I think the instinct is to maybe put your young quarterback in earlier than you typically should. And I think ideally Dart is a player who sits for almost all of the first year and then transitions in. The Giants do have actually like a pretty good scenario in place where you have both Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston. So even in the case of an injury, you don't have to force Dart in. And then maybe he's ready by the end of the year. Maybe you let him sit for this whole first year and then play in year 2. But when you're a coach whose job is in jeopardy, you might feel forced to see what that young quarterback can do. If you're Brian Daboll, like, you want to show that you're the person who can get the most out of Jackson Dart now. And I think that is a risky proposition for a young quarterback and, a football team that's probably not ready to compete right now. But how about day 3 players?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, like, this is an interesting draft. I think that they got value even beyond these guys at the top. Who's your guy on day 3 that you love for this Giants class?
Yeah, it's hard not to be instantly drawn to Cam Skattebo, the running back out of Arizona State. And like, obviously this is a really fun player, but this is a Giants team who got a lot out of Tyrone Tracy last year. I think having a complementary piece to that, like Devin Singletary did just fine.
Yeah.
But I think, if you can get a little bit of that thunder and lightning going with Skattebo and Tyrone Tracy, you start to recreate something in an offense that I think can help you be successful if you're forced to play a young quarterback, or even if you want to go with more of like a play action heavy style offense where then Russell Wilson has time to get the ball down the field to Malik Neighbors. So I think Skattebo could potentially be a big time value in the 4th round, where I think in a normal draft class, he probably would have been pushed into the 3rd or maybe even the 2nd.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth with Scatabo. Like, really, like, you talk about that combination with Tyrone Tracy. I think that's huge. Obviously, no one is going to be Saquon Barkley, and obviously, that's going to be one that takes a while for this organization to probably get over. But you kind of feel like maybe they have enough there, like you said, and they didn't have to spend a ton of resources to do it with Tyrone Tracy, where they got him, where they got Scatabo. So, like, I feel like that's a really good value that they have there in their running back room. I also wanted to bring up Marcus Mbow, and this is a player that, like, kind of in the, I don't know, all the craziness that happens on day 3 of the draft, I kind of missed until we pulled up this show doc that, like, Marcus Mbow went in the 5th round. This is a player that, like, I felt like late 3rd was like, like there's some development here for sure needed. But I think long term, like an interior player, I think maybe best position could potentially be at center. Like a few years down the road, it would not shock me if Marcus Mbow was an incredible NFL player. So getting him in the 5th round to just kind of add some depth to this offensive line and have someone who can contribute down the road, I think was a great get for them.
Absolutely. Really like Mbow, really like the value there. Now moving over to the Philadelphia Eagles in the 1st round at pick 31, they traded up one spot to get linebacker Jihad Campbell out of Alabama. In the 2nd round, they get Andrew Makuba as a safety out of Texas. And they did not have a 3rd round pick. So top of this draft, or if you want to dip into day 3, go ahead. But what are you thinking about the defending Super Bowl champions?
Yeah, so funny. Like Andrew and I both, we submitted our top 100 to the Huddle Report, and afterwards, I almost texted Andrew because I was like, I think Andrew Makuba is probably going to go earlier than we have him. Andrew and I probably didn't like him as much as apparently the Philadelphia Eagles did, but he was a player that did have a little bit of buzz going into the draft weekend that this is a player who's going to go higher. Of course, he went here 64 overall. So that one made me laugh a little bit because I was like, oh, dang it. Like, we should have moved him up a little bit, But, for the Eagles here, the Eagles have kind of always been the team that seems to steal great players at a great value. It was true last year with Cooper DeJean. It felt that way in 2023 with Keely Ringo and Walter Nolan, just players that like fell farther than I think a lot of people thought that they would. And you're like, oh, the Eagles, like, of course, they like grabbed him. I don't know this year. Like, I kind of like Jihad Campbell at 31 is a really good value. Like, that's a good player, good pick. But the rest of this class, like, doesn't get me too excited. Like, it's fine. It's just not the class that we've seen from the Eagles in recent years, where it just kind of feels like the NFL let them get another monster draft class and they get to reload and those kinds of things. So I don't know. I'm curious your thoughts here. But when I look at the Eagles draft, it's kind of Jihad Campbell, and you like that. And then you're like, I don't know.
Yeah, I love Jihad Campbell, but the issue is 30 other NFL teams let him slide, and you have to assume a bunch of those were because of the medicals.
Yeah.
And so, like, on tape, this is a top 15, maybe a top 12 kind of player in this class. So if he's healthy, great value for the Eagles, and they're willing to take risks on this. And of course, he's an Alabama defender, so
Yeah.
any Alabama or Georgia player in the front 7 there are going to snatch up. And so they're going to hope that he can step in and maybe even take some of those snaps that Nakobe Dean will probably miss early in the season while he's recovering from injury. But yeah, outside of that, this is not my favorite class. There's a lot of players that I was like lukewarm on that maybe they got slight values. Talk about Smail Mondon Jr., the linebacker out of Georgia. I think he's a fun player. I just, we'll see. That's a unique body type to be a fit. If I'm going to pick somebody later that I like the upside of, Cameron Williams, offensive tackle of Texas, and he was somebody that was getting 1st round buzz in the fall and just didn't play up to those standards.
Yeah.
And I definitely thought he would slide, but I thought like a tackle with good movement skills, like he's probably a right tackle, but like this is the guy with some really good upside to fall all the way to the 6th round. That was really surprising to me in a league that is so desperate to solve that position.
Yeah, I think interesting just in general, like not a specific player, but they took 3 offensive linemen on day 3. And so like they're throwing resources at that position. That's a very important position. That's why you do that. The other one to me, just Ty Robinson is a player that I did like. Like, I don't know that they got like insane value here or anything, but he's a player who's going to come in, super high character guy who's going to give good depth for them. Just, nothing. He's probably not going to be a star, but he's not going to be a player that you're afraid to go out and play meaningful snaps either. So yeah, an okay class, but overall just kind of vanilla for what we're used to seeing from the Philadelphia Eagles in the last couple of years.
And a place to make up time is the Washington Commanders because they had a 5-player class. But it should be noted that the reason why they're missing 2 of their picks were the trades for Marshawn Lattimore.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah, Marcus Lattimore was the running back from South Carolina who unfortunately had a bad knee injury.
Yeah.
So Marshawn Lattimore was the 3rd-round pick, and the 5th-round pick was Deebo Samuel.
Yes.
So some interesting additions outside of the actual class by using those picks. But in the 1st round, they go with offensive tackle Josh Conerly Jr. out of Oregon. In the 2nd round, they get cornerback Trey Amos out of Ole Miss. And so, if you want to talk about either of those 2 or the rest of their 3 picks, go for it.
All right. So to me, this is kind of like a swing for the fences draft for Washington. Like, if they hit on Conerly and Amos, it will change this football team dramatically. But if they miss on those guys, then you probably just, like, no disrespect to the rest of this class, but you kind of probably just throw out the 2025 class and you're back to the draft in 2026. Like, I love the Amos pick for where they got him. Like, I really wanted the Packers to take him when he was still on the board, but there are the medical concerns there and those kinds of things. But they have Mikey Sanders still. They love him. He's been great, but he's small. And that doesn't mean he's not a great player, but having someone like Amos come in gives you some size to play with on the perimeter, which allows Sanders still probably to play inside or out, depending on who the opposing wide receivers are that you're playing that week. So I love that pick for this team specifically. And then Conerly, I think, is a developmental tackle that if they hit, could be a really good player. So we won't know for 2 or 3 years, but this could be a big class for them, or it could be one that nobody really wants to talk about.
Yeah, I was really high on Josh Conerly Jr. I was excited to see him fall in the 1st round, and I think he is a fun pick with Jaden Daniels just because he has such elite movement skills that, when you have a quarterback that's pretty unpredictable and where he's going to end up in the pocket or outside of the pocket, to be able to have those movement skills and that ability to mirror is going to be really important. And it's an elite level mover. And then you hope that you can improve his strength enough that he can be an elite level tackle in the NFL. And we've seen that go both ways over the course of history. Like a player like David Bakhtiari, for instance, elite movement skills, big questions on if he could handle the bull rush. He figured it out. The NFL is littered with tackles who never figured it out, but to get somebody with those kind of movement skills at that size at pick 29, I think is a really good value for Washington.
So, I mean, only 5 picks there, but if you had to, is there a late day 3 guy that you're maybe he gets you excited a little bit?
I don't know. There's actually some players I'm not super familiar with. I know that Medrano, the linebacker out of UCLA in the 6th round, was somebody that some people that I trust really liked as a potential special teams guy that could maybe eventually develop into a rotational or a decent level starter. I did not do Jalen Lane, so this is a back half of the draft I'm unfamiliar with.
Yeah, I did not do Jalen Lane either, and I feel like I usually go pretty deep on the wide receivers, and so he was just one of those guys that I just missed him. He must have just been outside my group, and I was kind of surprised the 4th round wide receiver I did not watch. I will say Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, the running back out of Arizona, is a player that for a 7th round pick has a lot of talent, and I don't know where he's going to fit into that rotation. But if there's anywhere where you might be able to crack a lineup, it might be Washington. Brian Robinson is there, and then they have I don't want to say ancient Austin Eckler is still there. And so I just feel like there is room for a player to get carries. And so he's kind of a sneaky guy that it just kind of may come out of nowhere. 7th round picks don't hit, but he's a player that I feel like has the talent and the opportunity that maybe this time next year we're oh, why don't we talk about Ja'Cory Krosky merit a little bit more. So I don't know. It'll be
And
fun to kind of track this Washington class.
And for the listeners, Austin Eckler turned 30 5 days ago. So happy birthday, Austin. Kyle thinks that 30 is ancient.
And I am
Uh,
6 years older than that. So that makes me feel very old.
all right, moving on to the NFC North. The Chicago Bears in the first round at pick 10 take tight end Colton Loveland out of Michigan. They have 3 second-round picks. They go Luther Burden III, the wide receiver out of Missouri, Ozzie Trapilo, the offensive tackle out of Boston College, and Shamar Turner, defensive lineman out of Texas A&M. What are we thinking here?
Man, this class is interesting. And I know that we're Packer fans. So, like, we try to stay pretty objective. And I feel like we do a pretty good job of that most of the time. But this one, like, it has Ben Johnson's fingerprints all over it, right? Like, he wanted his Laporta. So they went out and they got Loveland. It's interesting that Loveland was the guy over Warren. I think it just tells you how they wanted to use that player. And then Luther Burden in the second was a surprise. And like the chaos around that pick, I think, is the most fun thing. Obviously, Travion Henderson went the pick immediately before Chicago to the New England Patriots there. And there are reports that Chicago tried to trade up one spot with New England to get Henderson. And then I think the Patriots also had other offers like to go back farther, and they stayed and obviously picked Henderson there. But the pivot to Burden is interesting because I think Coach Johnson probably sees a lot of Amon-Ra St. Brown in Burden, but I think DJ Moore does a lot of those same things. And so it's an interesting choice to me. It's kind of like Ben Johnson wants his guys to come in, and maybe there's some culture shift that has to happen. But I'm like, man, there's a lot of needs in that Chicago roster. I just felt like they could have reused those resources a little bit differently. Of course, Luther Burden could come in and be dynamite, but like I just thought it was a very interesting class overall.
Yeah, I mean, for a team, I feel like their defense was pretty good last year in Chicago, but I feel like that's going to be difficult to reproduce. And they had some major needs across the defensive line. I know they did some things in free agency to address that. But this really read like a team that was like, we are going to improve our offense this year and we'll worry about defense at a later time.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're going to address the interior of this offensive line thoroughly. And they definitely did that. 3 big names in free agency and via trade. And then we're going to get some more weapons. So Caleb has all of the tools that he needs to be successful. And it's interesting to me. I think Loveland is a wildly risky pick. And I loved Colson Loveland. Like, don't get me wrong. But when you look at this kind of player profile in tight ends that were drafted really high, whether it's like Noah Fant or Kyle Pitts or like, yes, these are different styles of players, but Loveland is more of a receiver than he is a tight end. Like, you're probably not expecting him to be a huge inline blocker. And is he athletic enough to be like so dynamic out wide that he is sort of a de facto receiver? And I don't know. He might be really, really successful. And I hope that's the case, but I don't think taking tight end early is often the recipe for a really successful game plan. And even some of the tight ends that turned out really good, like TJ Hawkinson, for instance, very different player, but like it took him years of development. Evan Ingram, probably an even better comparison to Loveland. Like that took years and a second team. So this is a riskier pick than I think it seems on the surface. Burden is not my flavor of ice cream, but it's going to be interesting to see what they do, because obviously working Roma Dunze into this offense is going to be really, really important this year. You're right. I think there's some duplication of skill set. And so who's going to occupy those middle of the field and behind the line of scrimmage targets? It's a mystery.
Yeah.
But we do know Ben Johnson is going to be really, really creative with who gets those. Ozzie Trapilo, I thought, was really rich in the second round. I thought he was a much later tackle. And, one of the things that I was thinking about, we'll talk about the Packers class in a bit. It seemed like teams were like, "Oh, we're out of tackle options," and
Yeah.
the Packers grabbed one right before the Bears, and then the Bears took Trapilo, and then it was like, okay, well, there's no more tackles left, so like nobody
Yeah.
draft one until like the 4th round.
Mhm.
So I could see why there was an urgency to get that pick done, but they are going to have to hope that he can develop into a potential starter going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to withhold my judgments on Luther Burden because I am fascinated. I'm with you. I think you and many people who I just kept waiting to see him do things deeper down the field, and I just didn't. And there are a lot of people who are like, well, just because he didn't do it in college doesn't mean that he can't do it in the NFL. Maybe he wasn't asked to. That's the one that I'm waiting to see. Like, what are his skills relative to what he was asked to do at Missouri? But I just didn't see a lot of downfield work that was successful. So that one I'm just really curious. I want to watch it as a fan to see how does that play out? How did Chicago evaluate him, and what are their plans there for sure? But just an overall very interesting class for Chicago. And I'm with you. This was a total investment in getting that offense right. It's just going to be a matter of, did they pick the right players?
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody later in this class that you wanted to address?
Not a ton. Like Luke Newman, the guard from Michigan State, is a player that, being in Michigan, I was familiar with. He went, I think, kind of where people thought that he would, and maybe even a little bit higher for some people. But a developmental offensive line who's got good movement skills, but may not have enough sand in the pants to stick. But the Bears want to probably run a combo of some gap stuff and some zone stuff, and so he may be a good fit there. But not a lot here that I thought on day 3 was overly surprising or anything that was super exciting to write home about.
Yeah, throughout the class, I embarrassingly never looked up how to pronounce his name, but the Rutgers running back Kyle Monangai, I think
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah.
He's interesting to me. And again, a lot of running backs slid into day 3 that I think had some decent value. And we know Chicago is going to want to run the ball, so we'll see what happens with DeAndre Swift. I'm a Roshan Johnson truther,
Yeah.
so but I think adding a rookie to the mix, where they clearly wanted a running back throughout this class and kept getting sniped. I think that's a chance to, be a valuable contributor in year 1. And so we'll move over to the reigning division champion, the Detroit Lions. And in the first round, they take defensive lineman Tyleik Williams out of Ohio State. In the second, they get Tate Ratledge, the guard out of Georgia. In the third round, they trade a boatload to move up and get wide receiver Isaac Tesla out of Arkansas.
Yeah, so let's start at the top because that's a more fun conversation. Tyleik Williams is awesome. I think this is the perfect fit for Tyleik, and I think for the Lions. He probably wasn't going to go a ton higher than this in the draft just because he's that nose tackle type, but I think he is exactly what Detroit needed, and he's a perfect complement to someone like Levi Onwuzurike, who I loved coming out just a few years ago, and I think that they can be a great combo together, with Onwuzurike kind of being more that penetrating defensive tackle next to the big guy like Tyleik. So I think the Lions did a nice job bringing him in, and I think he'll be a great fit there. But for me, I mean, I don't know how quickly we want to get into this, but the Tesla pick, man, that was the one. I was with a Lions fan at the time, and I saw the color drain from his face, and he tried to tell me that he was with it. He was like, "No, I see this." And I'm like, "No, no, nobody saw this." This was the wild one.
Do you remember Matt Jones,
Yes.
the
Yeah,
quarterback
Jacksonville, right?
slash
Yeah.
wide receiver? Yeah, and
Yeah,
Jacksonville
yeah.
took him in the first round. That's what a little bit what this reminds me of. This is the guy that is insanely athletic, but has zero production at the major college level.
Yes.
He
Yes.
transfers into Arkansas, doesn't really do anything, but he's huge. He's super fast. If anybody can get anything out of him, maybe the Lions can. But it's really interesting to me that they picked a wide receiver. They invested those resources into a wide receiver, because it's does that point to them not wanting Jameson Williams back? Because they're going to have to make some tough choices. They have too
Right.
many talented players to pay everybody.
Right.
So maybe that's where they see him fitting in. Maybe it's more in that Josh Reynolds role. I don't know. I don't get it, but they clearly have a plan, because they couldn't just wait to pick him. They had to give up a bunch of future resources. So that's interesting. Yeah, I didn't love the Tyreek Williams pick. I mean, I think maybe you and I see that a little differently. To me, he is like a good run stuffer, and that's about it. I don't see much upside in the pass rush game. So, like, that's fine, I guess.
Yeah.
But, like, I don't know. To me, the value of that is more in the second and third round. But, hey, the Lions know a lot more than I do. I do like a lot of what they did on day 3. Miles Frazier is somebody, an interior offensive lineman out of LSU that they got in the 5th round that I think is really valuable. And Hassanine, the edge out of Boise State, who they got in the 6th, is a super fun story, but also just like a ton of athletic upside and a guy who hasn't played football very long. So I think you can see where he could be a really fun developmental player down the line.
Yeah. I'm not going to pretend that I've watched Dan Jackson or the Lovett, the wide receiver from Georgia, like intently enough to have, no really developed thoughts there. But the Tesla pick, it's just so fascinating to me. You said it, like they trade up 32 spots and they gave away 2/3 in next year's draft, as well as the pick that they used to select him. So you took 3 picks to take this guy that I just don't think anybody else was going to take until the 5th round, like at least. Like maybe I'm wrong, but like you mentioned the production that's lacking there. But if you told me prior to the draft that Tesla got drafted ahead of Jalen Noel, Elik Iomanar, Torrey Horton, Jalen Royals, like I would have laughed in your face. Like just because like they're good players. Like they're not like great players, but like they have a much better profile for projecting their games to the NFL than what Tesla does. And you said, like, are we trying to replace Jameson Williams? Because like it's a totally different skill set, I feel like, than what you can expect.
Oh, yeah.
So like it's a very fascinating one. Again, like not rooting against the guy. It's just like how are the Lions going to use him? It's going to be a fascinating thing to see play out on the field this year, because he's not going to be so buried on that depth chart that he couldn't play early, but he doesn't really have the production profile to suggest that he's ready for that. So Lions, man, like they went wild with this one, and we'll have to see how that one works.
Yeah, that's going to be fascinating. And moving over to the Green Bay Packers in the 1st round, they shock everybody and take a wide receiver, Matthew Golden, out of Texas. In the 2nd, they grab offensive tackle Anthony Belton out of North Carolina State. And in the 3rd round, another wide receiver, Savion Williams, out of TCU. I don't think we've talked a ton. I know we were on a podcast together to talk about the Packers class, but outside of that, like not that much, considering it's our team.
Yeah. What do you, I loved the Matthew Golden pick. You don't even need me to tell you that. Like he was my guy, and I had the same grade. I'll be transparent. Like I had the same grade on Emeka Egbuka and Golden, and it was just a matter of like Egbuka is a slam dunk if you want a wide receiver 2. If you want a higher risk player with a higher ceiling, you take Golden. And so Green Bay took that risk, and it'll be interesting to see how he factors into the rotation for Green Bay. They've got a lot of good players, maybe no great players, but they have a lot of good players. It's just going to be interesting to see how he works with Jordan Love. Of course, I think the biggest factor to me when watching his film was how much of Quinn Ewers really limited his game. And I think he has like people are like, is he making it up that he couldn't run as fast as he could run at Texas? Or did they legitimately tell him like, listen, like Quinn can't throw that far. Like, don't like, or like, like they couldn't marry those things up. So it'll be really fascinating to see when he did an interview where they said like, what's it like to catch balls from Jordan Love? And he's like, it's different. And he just had a smile on his face. So, I mean, that's not like a shame on Quinn Ewers. It's just like, Jordan Love's going to be able to do some things that they weren't able to do at Texas. So I think that combo of those two is going to be a lot of fun to watch. What were your thoughts on day 2? Like what the Packers did? I think very different than maybe what fans expected.
Yeah, I'll just say this about Golden. And like, I was not as high on Golden as you were, and that's totally fine. But at a minimum, I think his speed is going to create challenges for opposing defenses in the same way that, let's say a Xavier Worthy did for Kansas City, where like safeties have to be on the lookout for that. And that might make them a step slower and crash in the box to get to Josh Jacobs. and the Packers just keep hammering the run game over and over and over and over, eventually Golden's going to get open. Now, whether or not Jordan Love can hit on the deep ball, I don't know, but he's got the arm. And he struggled accuracy wise, but maybe having somebody who's going to be open by 5 yards on a deep crosser might help him out a little bit. So really interesting there. I think Belton, very different kind of offensive lineman than historically Green Bay has coveted, but they're looking for the big nasties. And Belton is certainly that. This is a guy who got kicked out of a game for spitting on an opposing player.
Yeah.
And I think they're looking for a little bit of that additional toughness. So say what you want about the tush push, but I think the Packers are looking to move some opposing players on their end of the ball as well. And Belton probably slots into guard very soon. If not this year, he is the replacement for Sean Ryan going forward. So, not somebody I had rated super high, but I can see the vision there. And then Savion Williams, I don't know. This is fascinating. I don't know what they're going to do with him. He's super talented, super interesting player. It's just how are you going to manufacture this guy touches?
This is the crazy, those two picks back to back, had me soul searching for a while. I was still feeling the unbelief from the Belton pick, because I was with you. I didn't have him quite that high. I evaluated him as a tackle. And so I was just I don't know what we're doing here now, understanding that it feels like he is going to be the heir at right guard. And I can get excited about that. I think he could have a great career there. And that's a great skill set that he possesses for that move inside. But then so I'm oh geez, I'm unpacking that pick. And then Savion Williams pops up as the 3rd round pick. And I'm what is going on? We already took a wide receiver, and I naturally gravitate to the guys who are the smooth route runners and just the more polished products, right? And Savion Williams is the total opposite. He is the guy who is going to be a nightmare for opposing defenses because he can do so many different things, but he's going to be that gadget player. And I just didn't evaluate him through the lens of the creativity of a Matt LaFleur offense and what they would want to do in that regard. And so I think the Green Bay Packers saw that and they're we can get so much out of him in creativity that it's worth that 3rd round pick. I just did not in any way have him stacked where they did, or the need for another wide receiver where they did. And so those two picks together, man, going to bed on Friday night was geez, what just happened?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because I think for the Packers, who like to play their wide receivers more part-time and really rotate players in and out, this gives you another option. He's somebody who can definitely catch a screen pass on the outside, but I also think he's going to be a really physical blocker on the perimeter, and also somebody who can do a little bit of that Alan Lazard dirty work that they're going to miss with Christian Watson as well. And then maybe eventually he turns into a deep threat because his speed is crazy, and you can do some really creative things with him around the goal line. Catching passes out of the backfield or taking handoffs or whatever. So that's interesting. Anything on day 3 that you wanted to talk about?
I actually love the edge rushers that Green Bay added here, and they went back to back, 2 different flavors, right? If we're talking like 2 different flavors of ice cream here with Barron Sorrell and Colin Oliver, but Colin Oliver bringing something a little bit different with a little bit of lightning off the edge than that they've had. So I think Barron Sorrell gives you just some depth of a guy that you can throw out there and you're going to get a good football player. Maybe he's not ever going to develop into a star, but I think that's a really solid pick there that can help your team. And then Colin Oliver giving them that extra burst off the edge that we just haven't had in a while. So it's a lot to ask to get significant play out of your your 4th and 5th round picks. But when they kind of went away from edge rush early in the draft, which I think was a little bit surprising in some ways, to get both of those guys back to back, I think was something that fans could get pretty excited about.
Yeah, and I think Barron Sorrell is somebody that certainly fans are going to be rooting for, but also a really, really good player and somebody that is going to be an immediate factor in the locker room. That I think he has the potential to have a really nice, long, steady career. Oliver is the player I was going to mention as well, and I've always been fascinated by these like Elvis Doomerville type players, like just these lightning guys off the edge, and they don't pan out all that often. But you have to think for like some of these offensive tackles, it is really hard to reach down that far when a guy is that small, that bendy, that quick.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen a lot of linebackers have a ton of success the last season or two in the NFL blitzing because it's hard for offensive linemen to get their hands on them. And I think Oliver is somebody you can move around a little bit, have him come from different angles, and can be a really, really big factor in the Jeff Hafley defense. So a bunch of fun classes today. And we have our second 5-player class for the Vikings. So this one should wrap us up and go pretty quick. But in the first round, they take offensive lineman Donovan Jackson out of Ohio State. And then they pick in the third, and they get wide receiver Ty Felton out of Maryland. Anything you want to talk about there or day 3?
Yeah, this one rivals the Commanders as like, geez, like, I don't know. To me, this is it's a boring class. I'm not going to lie. Yeah. But a Donovan Jackson pick is definitely an eat your vegetables pick. And I would say that they addressed a need that they had on this roster at offensive line. So it makes a lot of sense. You can say like maybe it wasn't the best value in the world, but I think they knew what they had left to do. And the Vikings are treating this year as like, I know JJ McCarthy is going to essentially be a rookie starter even in a second year, but they're treating this as if they're going to compete for this division. We'll see if that's true. But I think that they knew if we're actually here to compete, this is a spot we need to address on our team right now. And so they did that with Donovan Jackson. Ty Felton, I like Ty Felton. I did not think he was going to be a 3rd-round pick. So like this was the one that I was like, geez, like, all right, like, kind of thought maybe you get him in the 5th and is a really fun, like kind of 3rd, 4th wide receiver for your team who can do a lot of really fun things. So I don't know that I love the Vikings class, but if Donovan Jackson hits and it helps you keep your young quarterback upright, we probably don't care so much about these late round picks hitting or not.
Yeah, that was an interesting pick to me. I was much higher on Donovan Jackson early in the process, and I kind of let the consensus talk me into moving him down a little bit. And so I think the value there is fine. You mentioned it's a boring pick, but that's okay. Ty Felton's interesting to me because I do think like theoretically good fit, like pure slot receiver, you know, in that offense. You're not going to pay attention to Ty Felton when you have Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, Aaron Jones coming up. But like, he's gonna be a 1-1 coverage his entire life.
Yes,
the Vikings. My issue is like the Vikings typically don't use a lot of 3 wide receiver sets. So is this a change in Kevin O'Connell's system? Is this something that maybe JJ McCarthy's a little bit more comfortable with working with players out of the slot? And then even so, like Addison and Jefferson both have the skill set that they can be great slot players. So or you can play Felton on the outside, which seems like a weird fit to me. I don't know. Like that to me is a little bizarre. If we're going to go day 3, I did really like Kobe King, the linebacker out of Penn State. And I think like you get him with the right coaching staff and he can be really successful. The Vikings, of course, have a great defensive coordinator. So I would expect Kobe King to probably be one of those really frustrating players where in 3 years we're like, how did the Vikings steal this guy in the 6th round?
Yeah, no, it's a fun thing that they're going to figure out there. I'm curious. Yeah, like you said, like do they only run 2 wide receiver sets a lot because that's what they've wanted to do, or is it like they're kind of like the inverse Packers, where like the Packers wide receivers are super deep but they don't have a star, and then the Vikings have like 2 stars and then like nothing behind them. So they're like, I guess we'll just play 2 wide receiver sets and get a tight end on the field sometimes. So it will be fascinating to see if that evolves for Coach O'Connell this year in 2025. But this has been a super fun conversation. We have worked our way through 2 divisions here in the NFC. And so it's really fun. Like Andrew and I haven't gotten a chance to really compare notes on what we think these players are, as they've found their team and as they've gotten to a fit, what does that do for how we kind of project them going into the NFL? So thanks for joining us as we kind of go through this for the first time. Make sure you like and subscribe to the show and watch for our next episode to drop in the days ahead. We'll continue to drop our thoughts on all 32 draft classes. Up next, we will work our way through the NFC South and the NFC West. But from the draft room to the gridiron, the Draft Fellows have got you covered. Until next time, stay tuned and stay in the game.
Kyle got the insight, Andrew brings the heat. Breaking down the roster every single week. Catch us on the podcast, we coming through your speakers. Top picks for practice squad, we got the seekers. Team dynamics, contracts, and the trades. From the draft day excitement to the accolades. Draft fellows on the track, we gone strong. Analyze the plays, we can't be wrong. From the 40-yard dash to the longest throw. We talking pro ball, yeah, you know.